Welcome back to another episode of Meet Cute, where we explore the stories of extraordinary people with radical meat-based beliefs. I'm your host, Alex Rhodes. In this episode, we dove deep with Temple, the ketogenic nutritionist. We started off by discussing the effects of hormonal dysregulation on weight loss and chronic disease, moved on to what exactly is the optimal human diet biblically, how spirituality affects our health journey and confidence, how our healthcare system fails us, and the importance of growth in longevity and prosperity. Perfect. All right. So we'll start with, keto is clearly a huge part of who you are. What led you to embark on this, challenging journey?
Yeah. So I think everything, if you trace it back to its very beginning, I started noticing something was kind of wrong with my health journey in college. I was a Division I athlete and I just wasn't feeling good. Like I started to have the classic female hormonal issues. Like I was skipping cycles. I was getting the cystic acne. I was just not feeling well. Like I was a little bit moody, a little bit depressed. I wasn't, I had the puff, the inflammation puff. I was having all these things. And I knew, one, I had never felt this before. And two, I really didn't like it, but I also didn't know what was going on. And I could remember going to the college nurse, and they prescribed me birth control, which is so typical. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I'll take this and try it and see if it works to regulate my hormones. And, fast forward a little bit, nothing really got much better. The birth control, I think, helped a little bit, put a mask on the symptoms. We know it doesn't fix anything. And I eventually decided, I was like, okay, I do notice that food helps quite a bit. Like when I clean up my act, I'm not eating a ton of sugar. I do feel better. And so I got really interested in nutrition. And that's when I really decided I wanted to be a dietitian. And so I started studying dietetics in college. And I eventually, kind of fast forward a bit, got an internship in Florida and was studying, in my fellowship as a dietitian. And that's when I was ultimately diagnosed with PCOS. It got really bad when I stopped playing soccer because I wasn't nearly as active. And so the weight kind of piled on overnight. And, at this point, the birth control I had stopped the birth control because it was basically doing nothing. And that's when I got the PCOS diagnosis. And I was really frustrated. I was newlywed and I really was wanting to have a baby one day and I wanted to feel better. And I felt like I got zero help from conventional medicine. They just were kind of like, take some metformin and spironolactone and move along. Like you can't get rid of PCOS. You'll have it forever. I remember specifically the OBGYN said I wouldn't get pregnant naturally and I would need to come back when I was ready to start IUI cycles and stuff. And I remember walking out of his office like, this cannot be right. I know there's alternative medicine out there. I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to get this right. And that frustration is really what sent me down the rabbit hole. I really started getting into keto at the time of all of this. I was working in a VA hospital for veterans, and Virta Health, which is the leading organization that studies keto and does research, did a pilot study at the hospital I was at, and I was seeing all these diabetics reverse type 2 diabetes, and I'm thinking, well, PCOS is basically diabetes of the ovaries. I wonder if this would work for me. And that's ultimately what gave me the courage to try it. And then I started getting into, Dr. Bickman's book, Why We Get Sick, and Dr. Fung's book. And then from there, it was just no turning back. So it was kind of a long journey, but ultimately I'm glad I had PCOS because I'm not really sure I would have found this had I not had my own struggles.
Yeah. So it seems like your sort of issues started happening in college primarily. There wasn't really growing up, you were fine. Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I was always an overweight kid. I was always significantly more overweight than my counterparts. And I was also adopted myself. So I didn't necessarily have the great start either. I definitely wasn't breastfed. There was limited prenatal care. I don't really know how well and I don't really know what the prenatal care situation was like. But I remember going to like a health fair at 7 years old and like getting my finger pricked, like blood glucose just for fun. And I remember the nurse being like very alarmed and like letting my parents know. And they kind of followed up with it, but not really because I was so young. And so I was definitely overweight as a kid. And I lived in South Mississippi, which we all know like is not the best if we stereotype the food there. It's just not. It's very fried, very rich. It's very good tasting, but it's just not like the healthiest food in the world. And so I didn't have any diagnosed health conditions as an adolescent, but I guarantee you if you dug deep when I was a child, you would have found something a little off.
Yeah. Yeah. How did that influence sort of like your self-esteem, like growing up, and how were you able to, overcome that eventually as an adult?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I mean, I remember when I was a young kid, like always, trying to hide my belly. I remember wearing big clothes, kind of the typical stuff that you hear kids that are overweight doing, wearing large sweatshirts. I remember our school had to wear uniforms. And I remember just being mortified, like, because I would have to wear like the high school kids sizes, whereas my peers were all wearing like youth smalls. And, so I do the best I could. I wore a lot of like, male cut clothes that weren't fitted. And so that I could feel like less tight. I never wore anything tight. And I was always self-conscious about, showing things. And so yeah, it definitely made an impact on me. And it also made me be able to relate to a lot of people because I know that feeling of like, I don't want to take pictures. I don't want to see myself in pictures. I don't want to look in the mirror. I don't want to do all these things because I just hated my body. I hated the way I looked. I hated my hair. I hated everything when I was a kid. And, ultimately I think what helped is I do think that this got better in college, mostly because I found faith and I started to love myself and I started to get confidence and I started to realize it's not all about looks and, I have a great heart and character and all that. So I think the tide kind of started to shift as I got older. And then ultimately when I started finding my health and feeling good and changing the direction of my hormonal dysregulation was really when, even though I still had some weight to lose, I really started feeling that confidence come back. And I think it was less about what I looked like, more about having hope and actually having a final destination of like, I can get this off. I can find, myself again, essentially.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, my follow-up to that question would be, how related do you feel? I mean, you talked a little bit about faith and this spiritual journey being such a huge part of that. Do you think that if you were in that past body physically, but spiritually in the place that you are now and mentally in the place that you are, and even health-wise in the place that you are now, do you feel like even then you would have felt confident,
Yeah.
even in that body?
Yeah, I do think so. I do think, even with a health journey, you have a spiritual journey. And I believe, I'm a non-denominational Christian, so I believe in Jesus and I believe in being created in his image and all of that. And I think that's really what ultimately, it took a while, just like a health journey. There's a spiritual journey and there's you fall back and you don't always wake up and look in the mirror and feel like, okay, I am, a child of God. I am beautiful inside and out. I am like created in his image. And it just like a health journey, you have pits and you have barriers and you have challenges. And so my spiritual journey was very similar, but ultimately I think if I would have, and I did, I grew up in church and that kind of stuff. But I think like when people grow up in church, a lot of times you have to find it for yourself. As a child, like it's one thing, you don't really get it. But once you become adult, it's like, okay, now you're exposed to everything else and you're exposed to all these other different paths. And then there's a whole nother journey that comes to it. It's like, okay, do I really believe in what I believe? And ultimately, I think that that's a hard thing for an adolescent to grasp. And so once I was able to get to the maturity level of that spiritually, then that's when I came to the conclusion that, I am created in his image and I am beautiful no matter what my physical appearance looks like. Now, I will say this too, to a degree. I do think that, yeah, I'll say that. I think that the spiritual journey helped. It helped me thrive in the health aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are absolutely synonymous.
Yeah.
They are one. You don't have one without the other, whether that, spiritual journey is like religious, whether it's non-denominational, whether it's Baptist, whether it's like spiritual in the sense of like you don't really, it's like Mother Nature or whatever. I do feel like whatever that thing is, it grows when you grow.
Yeah.
And no matter what aspect.
Yeah.
So with the spiritual aspect, what shifts have you noticed since being keto? I'm interested in that simply because, the hormonal balance is a huge part of this as well. Like, I know particularly for women, we're on a 28-day cycle. Sometimes we feel different throughout those cycles, the luteal phase, bless it,
Yeah.
Uh, so, how do you feel like your keto journey and balancing your hormones has affected, your spiritual and vice versa?
Yeah, so I would say that it's really, for me at least, I think it's always really important to understand that emotions can be disconnected from the word of God and truth. And so anytime that I'm feeling emotionally out of whack, whether it's whatever phase of the cycle I am or whatever stressful situation I'm in or whatever's happened to me, to understand that there's always truth that I can go back to that doesn't change and that's consistent and that doesn't shift or mold or do anything based on what's happening in the world. And that's really, really grounding in a lot of ways, because no matter what's going on with me, no matter what's going on in the universe and in job, whatever the case may be, there's always a truth that I can hold on to and go back to and stay stable with. And that is extremely calming and gives a lot of hope and peace. And so I think that that's one of the number one things I hold on to, especially as as emotions come, and we know as women that they do shift, and they shift pretty dramatically. And I noticed this in pregnancy especially, is like, wow, you can feel some things that you would never think that would make you cry, and you're crying over the smushed orange in the road, and it's like, what on earth? And so I think that that's one of the benefits of having strong faith, is like, okay, even though like I feel like I need to be upset, I feel like everything's going wrong, my life is falling apart, even though it may not be, whatever the case, you have truth and you have something that will not shift and is not fickle and, won't fly away with the wind, that you can grasp onto and know that it's solid ground.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. So, I mean, I come from a Southern Baptist religious family. So every time I see somebody who is, extremely spiritual, no matter what denomination they are, I'm just always curious, because the stories are just so different, and, what they lean on within, a biblical sense is always sort of different. And I think the reason the Bible is so vast is that we are so vast, right? Nobody's one and the same.
Yeah.
So, I always ask this question because my dad and I have had this conversation in the past, but like, do you consider your diet biblical? And where does it cross over from what God considered to be good to what man marketed as good?
Yeah, so I absolutely do. I mean, there's many verses that talk about like, meat is given to man and for consumption. I mean, it says it in Genesis, right? Meat and greens. So like, I absolutely do not have any hesitations about obviously eating meat. And I think this is one of the things that gets twisted. And I'm not trying to throw like veganism or vegetarianism under the bus, but this can often get like with the Daniel plan. And that was this for a specific purpose and time and reason, the whole story of Daniel and all of that. But you can look throughout the Bible and see like we were given reign over the dominion of animals. And so yes, 100%. I do not think that there is anything wrong with eating plants and meat. And so, yes, I feel absolutely no conviction. Now, in terms of what men market as dieting, I think it all just gets very convoluted in a lot of ways. I think you look at what diet, I think you have to follow the money a lot of the times. And I think you have to look at what, I think the Bible is a very good set of instructions, including what we should be eating. And, even talking about unleavened bread and stuff like that in the Bible, it's like, okay, yes, we look at that. We also need to understand wheat was much different back then. It was like, it's completely different than it is now, and how agriculture is now. So I'm not discrediting that they ate a lot of bread in the Bible too. Times were much different then. And so I don't have any discrepancy with eliminating carbs either.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the whole, like, now I think you just have to be careful about where the money is. And so with that being said, like, men have literally created food. Like, we have created food and we have sold food. And the whole purpose, if you look behind everything, is profit. You know, it's certainly not health. It's all profit. And so when you look at that, and to a degree, sustaining life, like, I totally get the whole planet can't eat strictly meat per se, but yeah, so, you know, I think that maybe was a little bit of a confusing answer, but I have no convictions, meat and veggies. And then I think with the processed food corporations now, I think it just comes down to, like, what are their incentives? What are their motives? And are you actually eating real food? When I look at an ingredients list that's, you know, 2 paragraphs long, I have questions. And, you know, I don't think that in biblical times they were eating Fruit Loops and, you know, corn syrup.
And xanthan gum.
Exactly. And so the closer we can get to ancestral, and I hate, it's kind of cliche, but, like, typically the better, even if that means a little unleavened bread here and there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. And, you know, I mean, I think a lot of it too, if you think about activity level, which I'm a big fitness girl,
Yeah.
You know, back in the day, you're talking, they walked everywhere. There were no cars, You know, so unleavened bread, you know, is going to be a great energy source for them. Whereas we spend most of our day stagnant, you know, and just sitting. So, you know, I think there's definitely a barrier there that people just don't even realize, you know. I mean, yeah, if you go to the gym a couple hours a day, probably if you ate some bread, you're going to be fine.
100%.
Yeah. 100%. But yeah, no, so I love that. No, that was a great answer. I think we went on a great roundabout there.
Good.
Okay, so my next question for you is, and I was really excited about this one. You work in a hospital as a dietitian. Are you able to freely express your ketogenic views when working with patients?
Yeah, so I actually don't work in a hospital anymore. So I started my career. I started my career. It's okay. It's kind of confusing online, but I started my career 4 years in a hospital, and then I quit working in a hospital to do private practice telemedicine the year COVID hit. So I've been doing telemedicine solely online for 2 or 3 years now. But to answer your question, absolutely not. I was not able to do keto like blatantly. And I didn't realize, like, at first I was a young dietitian. So I was hired on by my hospital immediately after my internship. So that where I did my internship, they hired me. And I love the hospital I worked at. I had incredible coworkers. I had great staff that I worked at, but, you know, keto is just not friendly in the dietitian space. Like, it's just not. And I don't know why. I mean, I have my speculations in terms of, like, there's a huge movement of, like, food freedom and, like, eat whatever you want, everything in moderation. All those movement type mentalities kind of completely anti-diet, completely are opposite of keto. I started realizing that, like, it was not a friendly thing to do when I started talking about it. I was like, guys, this is really interesting. Like, I'm losing a ton of weight doing this. My cycles returned. Like, I'm watching Virta Health, like, get people off insulin and metformin and all these oral agents. Like, what are we doing? Why are we not doing this with every diabetic that comes through our doors? Because, you know, the veteran population, I mean, they are absolutely just, I mean, the metabolic disease, it's horrible. It's horrible. And hypertension, overweight, diabetes, all of it, they need help. And I'm thinking, man, keto could be a complete game changer. And I was getting a lot of, not pushback, but a lot of, like, oh, we don't really promote that because it eliminates a food group, but, you know. And so anyway, I did it anyway, because I have that personality where it's like, well, it's working and my clients are getting better, so I don't really care. And it was awesome. And my patients were doing great. My veterans were losing 60, 70, 80 pounds, getting off all their medications. Doctors from other clinics, like around the hospital, were specifically sending their veterans to me at the hospital because they were hearing that I was getting, so it was like exploding. And that's when I realized, I was like, you know what, if I'm going to be tamped down and this isn't going to, like, be something I can openly do, I'm going to go kind of do it on my own. And I had some other reasons for leaving the VA, but ultimately, it's not a friendly place. No medical establishment is, unless you find a very special one or an outpatient clinic with a specific leader who believes in it. And so, yeah, it was when I left and started my own private practice, it was fantastic. I have not had a shortage of clients in 3 years. In fact, I have more than I can handle at the moment. And so, I think slowly people are catching on. Like when I was there at the hospital, there was a psychiatrist who would have me come speak to his veterans about keto, because we know keto is so good for brain health and treating like these mental disorders, bipolar, schizophrenia, and stuff like that. Like, I don't know if you've heard of Chris Palmer, but he's a fantastic physician who just wrote a book. I believe it's called Brain Energy. And it's about treating these horrific mental issues with keto, and people are just getting their whole lives back. And so, people are slowly getting there. I give it 10 to 15 years. I think it'll be mainstream, I hope. But at the time, it was just not. I was getting a lot of pushback, and that's okay. I still get a lot of pushback online. People, I'll get dietitians in my comments all the time telling me they're going to report me, all kinds of stuff. And that's fine. Like, you got to ruffle some feathers. If you're not ruffling a few feathers, you're probably not doing something right. So, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. Next question. I think we already kind of touched on it in our initial thing, but like, how do you find the motive? Like, how did you find, if you think through your journey, right, going keto, it had to have been difficult at some point, right? Think back to those difficulties and like, what motivated you then? And was there ever a time that you wanted to give up?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think everybody's health journey, they want to give up sometimes. Yeah. Ultimately, what motivated me the most is like, I knew I wanted to have children. I knew that I wanted to be a great mom for a long time and play with my great grandkids if the Lord allowed me to live that long. And I always knew, because I worked in the hospital, I saw people that were old but had no quality of life. So I saw people that would live to their 80s and 90s but were stuck in a bed, and I didn't want that. I want to be able to I want to be completely intact. I want to be able to walk and run and maybe not run, but, walk fast and be, and like, I want to live out my days with a good quality of life. And I want to be able to do adventures. I want to play with my kids. I want to coach their soccer teams. I want to do all that. And I knew in the body that I was currently living in that it just wasn't. I didn't feel good. I barely even felt like getting out of bed some days, and I just knew that wasn't going to be the way that I would live my life. And I also have a very high drive to to achieve. Like, I wanted to start a business. I wanted to do all these things. And I just knew, like, I'm tired. I'm unmotivated. I have no energy. I feel like crap. I'm always hungry. Like, all these things were all taking up too much of my mental space that I could not give people my all, and it just wasn't working. And so that's ultimately, like, I think what keeps me motivated. Like, and you know this, like, once you feel good, it's so hard to go back to feeling bad, and it's like, and I tell this to my clients too. I'm like, just trust the process. Cause once you feel good, like, you'll understand why you're doing this and why, like, people get addicted to this and in a healthy way, and
Yeah.
so, but yeah, there were times I wanted to give up. One of the biggest moments I think that's happened recently, and I kind of touched on this is, I don't know what my prenatal care and all that stuff was. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. So I know autoimmunity has been a thing because I've had some markers for it ever since I was in college and stuff like that. But I got ulcerative colitis out of all things. It's like, what? Like, I'm eating healthy, but it was debilitating ulcerative colitis. And it essentially happened after my daughter was born. So I had a great pregnancy, had my daughter. She had a life issue, it could have taken her life like 4 days after she was home with us. We had to rush her to the ER. They rushed her to a trauma 5 NICU across the bay. We were living in Florida at the time. It was horrible. It was so stressful. I wasn't eating. All I could think about was like, is my daughter going to make it to the next day? Is my daughter going to make it to the next day? These catastrophic events kept happening. It was horrible. And ultimately they came around and said that's what's triggered your autoimmune, like the trauma and the stress of that. And honestly, that was 2 years ago, and that was a barrier. That was a time where I'm like, you know what, to heck with all this. Like, I want to quit everything. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to just sit at home with my kids. And so I think it's very easy when things like that happen to want to throw the towel in completely. But ultimately, I come back down to, okay, what got me started in the first place? I want to live a long time. Yes, this is another barrier. Yes, I'm faced with another quote unquote diagnosed chronic disease, but I've overcome everything else. And like, this is just another thing, another challenge that's going to give me a notch in my belt to help a client that has ulcerative colitis. And so ultimately, long story short, I think if you go back to what got you started in the beginning and you really dig deep for those intrinsic motivators versus like, oh, I want to look good in the mirror. Yeah, that's great. That'll last you for a little bit, but you're not going to care about that when you're 85, right? And so going back to those intrinsic motivators and holding on to them when things get really rough and things get really hard is what helps me stay on track and what helps kind of bring me back to, okay, this is my focus. This is where I want to go. This is why I want to do it.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a beautiful reference to what we discussed sort of biblically earlier, is you have these emotions, right? They're high. They feel like they should be running everything in your life. But then you have this core truth that is you, like why you started, and you always have that to fall back on and to make reference to. And I feel like that's, just a beautiful way of how you do keep your emotions balanced, yourself balanced. So yeah, I wanted to tie that back to that because I thought that was a beautiful way to apply that in real life.
Yeah, it is. It's great. It's holding on to what keeps you motivated.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so your PCOS, you clearly got through that, and that's no longer an issue, yeah?
Oh yeah, it's completely. I'm not even diagnosable. Anytime I say that online, though, you get a ton of like, oh, you can't reverse PCOS. But yeah, it's if you can't diagnose me with it, I don't have it.
Right, absolutely. That's kind of how medicine works. We believe in it until it goes against what we believe.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah. So you were able to get pregnant, and throughout your pregnancy, honestly, you touched on, I would much rather, dig into your children and how, this has sort of affected them. What was that like, I guess from that time to now, what has it been like with your kids, like their lifestyle, teaching them health? You mentioned you have an adopted child. Like has keto in any way made its way into their life, and has it affected them in positive light as well?
Yeah, so we adopted my 4-year-old before I actually gave birth to my now 2-year-old. So we adopted my 4-year-old out of foster care in 2020, about the same year that I quit my job, actually. And yeah, she was a mess. So my 4-year-old came, she was actually in a foster home that neglected her. So my 4-year-old at the time that we adopted her was 17 months old and weighed like 11 pounds, which is like infant weight. I mean, that's horrible. She was failure to thrive. She couldn't sit. She was just like this like tiny body with no musculature. She could not do anything. And I remember when we got her, I just like, I learned about malnutrition and failure to thrive as a student dietitian, but we live in the United States. You don't think those things are like possible here, right? And then you get a child and I'm just looking at her like, oh my gosh, like she is full on failure to thrive. She had all these issues. She had these gastrointestinal issues that they were saying to me that she was going to have to be on these medications the rest of her life because she can't move food, all this stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a lot. And long story short with her, it ended up being a blessing the time we got her because COVID shut everything down. So we were at home able to do PT and OT and doing all these therapies with her hands-on. So we were able to build up a lot of this musculature. And I know how to treat a lot of that, put muscle on, put weight on her. So it's given her, all these high caloric density foods. I've obviously given her tons of protein as much as we could. We were blending up, ground beef and all this stuff for her to eat. Real food. She had never been on anything but formula at 17 months old, which is abuse in itself. And so she was finally eating real food and she was loving it. I mean, she would eat like a whole avocado at a time. She was eating like 3 or 4 eggs at a time. It was fantastic to watch her put on weight. And so absolutely my kids, I would be, I really believe in practicing what you preach. And so my kids, like, I want them to understand like what real food is and what it feels to be good, feel good at a young age. And I am also very cautious about, like, I know that we can't do the good food, bad food thing. Like, I'm not going to instill an eating disorder in my children. Like, we still have fun foods from now and again, but we have open dialogue about, like, okay, honey, like, this is sugar, like, you can eat the sugar, but this is how sugar typically makes you feel. And so we talk through all of this stuff, and it makes a lot of sense to them. And so that's fun. That's a fun conversation to have because they can get it. Even at a young age, they understand, like, oh, I'm hungry. I need to eat. They call it real food. And then they'll go like pick out eggs or something, which I love. So yeah, keto has made its way into our family. My husband completely changed his diet when he met me, and he's lost weight. He loves, all the biohacking stuff we do, and he's cold plunging with me. And so it's fun, and I love it. And so it's really nice to feel like you're taking care of your family in that way and instilling values that they'll eventually teach to their children, long term. And with my daughter, my youngest, it was really interesting because the thing that happened to her after birth was actually like a metabolism disorder. It's a fat metabolism disorder. So essentially what was happening is she was like digesting breast milk, except it was leaking into her chest. So there's like this duct that goes through your body. I don't want to get too into it, but it essentially had a hole in it. So it was like leaking fluid into her chest, and it collapsed her lungs. So it all because of breast milk. And you were like, oh, but I think I'm making the healthy thing. Like, I'm giving her breast milk. And so we get to the hospital, and, they end up having to feed her through her veins through TPN for a month. It was very serious, and it can be life-threatening. But ultimately she's fine. She still breastfeeds it too, and all these other things. But she eats ground beef, and she loves steak, and she loves oysters, and she eats shrimp. And so, my kids, yeah, they've caught on. My family's caught on, and it's great. So I didn't mean to make that long, but it's good when you see your family making the right decisions and you're not having to pressure them to eat.
So. Absolutely. I feel that 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you did an amazing job leading by example, and the fire caught on. So was there ever a point throughout sort of like this transitional period, like you said, your husband, were you keto before you met him?
No, he went through the transition with me. And it's actually kind of funny, and he would probably be embarrassed about me saying it, but I'll say it anyway because he's a good sport. He actually went through like all the weird diets. So like I kind of went through a couple diet transitions before I found keto because I didn't really know what to do, and I was doing what I learned in school. So I was doing the whole like dietitian my plate thing, which was a fail because I was like eating all these carbs and getting bigger. And he did that. And then I was like, this is not working. I'm going to switch to vegetarian. He did all that. And then we did vegan for a stint. And when we went, oh man, the vegan stint was terrible. And I was very particular because I was like, okay, we need to like combo all the foods. With veganism, you have to be very careful because you've got to get all these amino. It's very complicated. Mm-hmm. And anyway, his testosterone like tanked, and I was like, oh God, what am I doing? So right after veganism, we switched to keto, and it was like, oh man, I was like, okay, we're good. Like, I'm out of the clear. It's basically killing my husband here for a second, but it was really funny because, he's such a good sport, and he like really trusts what I say. Which is, marry a man that like listens to everything you say, because that's really nice. But he like, does all these things with me and was very supportive of any dietary decision that I was making for us. And so he's all on board. We've done a carnivore stint. I felt great on carnivore stint. And so, we kind of experiment with it all. So I say with it all, we're basically keto carnivores now. And we feel great doing it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing. So everyone that I talk to has a pretty significant change in their relationship when they, do keto or carnivore or something like that. So, clearly there had to have been a difference from like veganism to, keto carnivore. So how has it, affected your marriage, and in what ways?
Yeah, well, with veganism, testosterone, it plummeted. I mean, I think his went to like in the 200s, which is like, that's terrible. Like terrible for, he's like what, 31 at the time, I think. Like you're 31, there's no reason your testosterone should be in the 200s. And that's when I really realized, this was even before I like was super educated on kind of how veganism really does tank your hormones. And that's when I really realized, I was like, oh, we will never do this again, like ever. Like I will never be able to consciously promote this as a dietitian, because it was epic. And men, testosterone's everything. I mean, it's like the main driver. And women too. I mean, women need testosterone too. And I'm not discrediting that, but for men, like low T is like, it sucks. The low libido, low muscle mass gain, like the mood, the motivation, everything that makes a man is essentially in testosterone. Not only, but like so it was just like, he just didn't even look good. Like he just looked kind of sickly. And so it was like attitude wise changed. And so just, and we always have had a great marriage. Like we've been great connection wise, but it was just like, oh, I could tell like, he's not operating on top of his game. My husband's very, he's a pastor, cares a lot about people, loves everyone, and very motivated loves to work hard, loves to do CrossFit, like very like driven. And that kind of just whittled away a little bit during the vegan times. And so, it didn't whittle away. It was just harder to muster up for him. And so, that really shifted when we started doing a lot of meat, because cholesterol is a precursor to testosterone. So you give a little meat and it's like, I mean, his testosterone within like a month or two went up to 600 from 200. So it was like, it emits changes just within a few months, and now it's even higher. So it's like, it was a massive difference just in mental health for him. And I wasn't really paying much attention to what was happening with me, but I mean, I was definitely having the symptoms. I was definitely anemic. My hair was coming out. Like I definitely wasn't doing better. I was gaining more weight. So yeah, it was a bit of a mess there for a second, but overall, I think seeing like, okay, we feel terrible now, and this is how we feel when we feel good. Like we're driven, we're motivated. We want to conquer the world. We want to stay in that lane.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, I mean, it sounds, I love sort of how you phrase things, and I can tell a lot that like perspective is important to you.
Yeah.
So, my next question would be, what are your thoughts on perspective, and like, how do you utilize it as a tool in your daily life?
Yeah, well, I think the battle with health is really won first in the mind and with perspective. So like, I can just tell you, I've counseled thousands of women via telehealth, and I can pretty clearly tell within the first couple weeks of working with someone if they're going to be successful long-term or not. And I can just tell by the way they're talking about things, by the way that they're talking about their journey, by the way that they're talking about their, like what they expect. And immediately, if I start to get this negativity or like, I can't, I will never, I'm not good enough, that type of thing, it shifts from like how to do keto to like mindset. Because if that perspective and that like, oh, that it's all negative and like, I can't, I won't, nothing will ever go my way, the world is against me, you will speak that into existence type thing. And so, yeah, it's huge. I think mindset is huge when it comes to health, no matter what journey you're facing. And you can even see this in research. Like you look at cancer patients undergoing treatments, and you look at like, they take surveys of like hope and who believes they'll beat this and who believes they'll be survivors. The ones who believe it, the ones who acknowledge it, the ones who think that they're going to beat this are the ones who do. And so it's like that's very important. It's the same thing with weight loss. The ones who believe it, the ones who think they can, they'll always end up losing more, keeping it off longer, being successful long term. And so I always tell people it's one of the most underrated aspects of weight loss and health is what you're doing in your mind. And if you are constantly degrading, you're constantly talking negative, you're constantly abusing your body with your thoughts, it's going to be a bad experience, and you're going to be constantly on this yo-yo because you're never going to kind of overcome that barrier, and you're always going to keep yourself down with your mind, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think belief is like 80%. It's kind of like we talk 80-20, nutrition's 80%, gym's 20%.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Belief's 80.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Is there any advice you would give to mothers trying to balance a family and a healthy lifestyle?
Oh yeah. First and foremost, you cannot take care of your kids if you do not take care of yourself. Like, period. Like, if you are letting yourself get run down, no sleep. Now, I understand there's situations that are inevitable. Like, I have the sick kids that come get in bed at 2 a.m. and keep me up all night. I totally get it. But if you prioritize everyone else but yourself, you are going to fail, and it's going to be bad, and you're going to end up being angry, yelling at your kids, not treating them correctly, yelling at your spouse, and it's just going to end up disaster. So I advise all my moms, and this has been a game changer to me, like, get rid of the mom guilt and take some time. And I don't mean like take some time, like go away for a week, or if that's what you need to do it. But like, even if it's just small increments of like, okay, my time is like getting in the cold plunge for 2.5 minutes at the night, at night when the kids are in bed, or like doing little things that make me feel good and that will help me take care of my kids, and so prioritizing diet, prioritizing sleep, reading a book when they're at daycare, doing whatever you can to fill your cup, because it's always like I always give like the airplane analogy, like when the oxygen masks fall, like if you're just like running around trying to put oxygen masks on everyone but you forget yourself, like eventually you're going to pass out in the airplane. So like you have to prioritize yourself before you can really make a difference and help your kids and take care of your kids. And so if that's health, that's health. If that's taking care of your faith, that's taking care of your faith. That's being intentional with your husband or spouse. Do that. Like, make a date night, hire a babysitter, do what you have to do. Your kids will be better off if your marriage is in a healthy place and if you're in a healthy place than if you're running around ragged trying to make things best for them, but you are, flapping in the wind. And so that would be the best piece of advice I could give a mom with balancing things. And the second piece of advice I would say is be able and learn the word no is a complete sentence. Like, no, like I'm not going to do that. No, I don't have time to do that. No, I can't show up at that conference. No, I can't do this. Like, it's okay. You don't have to apologize. You don't have to give a long explanation. Just no, and protect your time and prioritize it, because you can't get it back. And yeah, just no is a complete sentence would be my second train of thought for my moms that are overworked and super busy.
Temple, those were great. I'm like, am I allowed to use no as a full sentence
Totally.
since I'm not a mom?
Yes, totally. Absolutely. No, absolutely. Totally a complete sentence for everyone.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you so much, Temple, for being here today. We so enjoyed having you. I really just like so enjoyed my time with you. I would just love to get to know you better, even in the future. I will stay in touch. I think you are truly a really, inspiring and motivational human.
Thank you.
Honestly.
Likewise. Yeah, likewise. And I would love to stay in touch. And if you need anything, let me know.
Yeah, for sure. And same to you.
All right, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Until we meet again.